just.
I think he knows it. It's just he was switching from that.
All right,
there we go.
Here we go.
Now you're on.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Tonight is Tuesday, September 12th. We're here as a joint meeting between the advisory board, Selectmen, and capital planning. Just to go over, do some pre-planning in advance of this year's budget cycle. So what I'll do is turn things over to Brian, and he can take us from there.
All right. So congratulations, this is the most exciting meeting you're going to go to all year. What I thought we would do is just kind of run through like how we got to where we are in terms of the drafts that we have. And then the three things on the agenda are the draft policy, the draft calendar, and then talking about a potential score sheet. So just as a reminder, last year, actually about a year ago, we met with John Kader to talk about best practices for the town. It seemed like everybody was pretty excited about some of the suggestions he had given. And so we spent fall through the budget season working on a few different things, including mission statements and org charts and improving our budget narrative and glossary. And then we also started developing a draft set of financial policies. And then earlier in the summer, advisory and capital planning met, and we kind of agreed that one way to focus our energies would be a combination of the capital planning policy and then certain logistical steps that we could take in terms of improving our capital planning process. So that's where we are. As a reminder, last year John kind of showed us the elements of strategic budgeting. So we're kind of tackling financial policies and a capital improvement plan. We can't do everything at once. So what we're trying to do is tackle distinct but interrelated projects, and the town hall staff has been unbelievably helpful in kind of ushering us along and providing feedback along the way. What we don't want to do is make unnecessary work for anybody, so all of these projects are basically meant to advance the town's long-term interests without wasting employees and volunteers' time. Now this next slide is for Stan. my vacation pictures. We don't really talk about this sort of thing in our meetings, so I hope you'll indulge me, but whenever you do something different, there's going to be growing pains, and I just think it's important to remember, especially for the folks watching at home. Sometimes people come into meetings and they're new to a topic and they have really strong opinions, and I think our basic operating assumption has to be people that are working in the town hall, the people that are volunteering on boards, and the citizens that are coming in are all acting in good faith. We have different ideas about what's in the town's best interests, but I think really everybody's just trying to do what's best for Bolton. So, getting to the agenda, capital planning policy, the way that was drafted was we looked at sources that the Division of Local Services had published, guidance from the Government Finance Officers Association, and then after we did several rounds of drafting, Donna and Anachka in particular gave really great feedback initially before we circulated it to the Board of Selectmen and Capital Planning. And so the current draft that we're reviewing today is sort of the third iteration, and it incorporates some feedback from Capital Planning as well. So the idea, though, I think just to keep everybody on the same page, everything that we're looking at tonight is not set in stone at all. The whole point of this is to get everybody in the room to kind of reach consensus on things. And even when we do reach consensus, this is just going to be a test run for the FY19 budget cycle. So does everybody have the clean draft of the capital planning policy? Basically, there were a few changes from the prior draft, but we define what a capital improvement is, and then we define what a capital improvement program would be, which is basically, it's the 6-year plan, which includes the first year, meaning the current fiscal year budget, plus 5 years projecting out. And I think that's essentially what capital planning does now. You guys have a 6-year plan, more or less. And this policy would kind of set a formal capital improvement program as a goal, because I don't think we have as full-fledged a program as maybe we would want to. So the elements, I think, just as a practical term, practical matter, last year, did we start using the project detail sheet that Northborough, I think the DPW used, like that kind of a project detail sheet.
Yeah, we started that.
So these project detail sheets, the way I've been thinking of them is this is where the proponent of a capital improvement project describes and justifies what the capital project is. So there's a lot of work obviously that goes into it, but this isn't the evaluation form. This is like the form that would allow the evaluators to evaluate. And then I included this because there's another form that the Division of Local Services created, which you can't really see here, but I have it in Excel. It's pretty similar to the one Northborough and our DPW is using, but I thought that if capital planning were interested in seeing whether there's anything that they want to kind of add, we can talk about that tonight, because I have the live Excel version.
Were those in the handout? Do we remember?
No, this, because it's actually like a huge multi-sheet Excel file, so I can circulate it afterward. And now then for the evaluation portion, we'll talk about this last, but this is kind of an example of a score sheet that could be used by a team of evaluators, whether it would be, all capital planning committee or a mix of capital planning and advisory and selectmen and maybe members of the finance team. I think that's all open for discussion. So I guess I'll just pause there and say, do folks have feedback or questions or comments or edits about the policy?
Not so much from the policy in general, but I think, and I've talked to Don a little bit about this, I think we might want to consider sort of two categories of capital improvement. There's capital improvement like, we're going to have to replace the roof on Florence Sawyer School, which is something that we, don't do every year. Or we're going to make some improvement to Main Street, or we're going to do something, that's a fairly expensive project that we don't necessarily undertake on a yearly basis, and it doesn't necessarily occur within the operating budget. And compare that or contrast that with items, capital items, that really are more relative to the operating budget of the town and are required for the day-to-day operation of the town. To your example here, the chest compression system, buying a new dump truck. Because I think there's a difference in evaluating a new roof on Florence Sawyer, or I'll just use because Harold's, we haven't gotten a replacement, or Harold needs a new dump truck. And I think, if Harold says he really needs a new dump truck, the scoring of that kind of a moot point. And I think, maybe we should look at these kind of capital expenses maybe in kind of two buckets. The operating ones versus the exceptional. This is, we'll do Florence Sawyer roof, and we're not going to do it for another 10 or 20 years. We're going to improve a section of Main Street, we're not going to do it for another 10 or 20 years. Mm-hmm. We're going to build a building, and we're,
Hopefully it's going to be 50 years.
50 years, right. So I think, maybe that, because, I don't think it's really necessary to debate and score whether Harold needs a backhoe. I mean, if he says he needs, or who the DPW, if they need a backhoe, they need a backhoe. If they need a dump truck, they need a dump truck. They need that for the day-to-day operation of their department of the town versus the roof. That's because we've kind of finally decided, okay, the cruiser's in the operating budget. We did something extraordinary. One was in, one was out. But typically, the cruiser is needed, and we've determined that. It seems like we need one every year, or whatever the cycle is. But it's part of the operating budget. It's not something that we do this grand debate and score because, you know, the chief needs an cruiser, that's all.
Yep. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
You're gonna have to define it, though. So, because right now,
Oh, it still needs to be defined, yes.
because right now, they've chosen a dollar number like 25,000 or whatever, so anything that's over $25,000 with a 5-year life is considered capital. You're kind of headed in a different direction there, so you need to make sure that that either those definitions are
Right.
split, or else,
Right,
yeah, it's broad enough to cover both kinds.
right,
And say that there's difference in the way you approach it.
yeah. Oh, I agree.
Do other people have an interest in kind of like tweaking any of the language of the policy now? Or do you want to kind of wait and submit things by email? Because I thought that with everybody in the room together, if there are points of like substantive debate, so for example, the policy right now kind of assigns certain responsibilities that are shared, and then some of them rest more on the capital planning committee alone. So just to take an example, on page, I guess it's 6 of the policy, under capital project monitoring and closeout, policy says, for capital items that are approved at a town meeting, the capital planning committee will develop a system for monitoring and reporting on project activity, including schedule, cost, and scope of work. I don't know if folks think that that's a reasonable thing to expect the capital planning committee to do. So those are the types of things I thought maybe people would have reactions to.
Would they necessarily know? So say for example, like, I don't know, a DPW project, maybe the head of the DPW might have a better idea of, you know, scheduling costs, scope of work. Or would you want them to give that information to capital planning and then, so I don't know. I
Yeah.
just don't know if capital planning and, if they
I'm not
have
sure
that
that,
information.
I agree, I'm not sure that that's a role that capital planning plays directly. Capital planning plays an important role in the planning for it and the prioritization and all that, but once we're into operations, either the department head reporting into, I would say advisory, and the town administrator or the town administrator reporting into advisory, actually advisory. But I'm not sure that's a reasonable expectation for capital planning to do.
What you probably want to have is a set of instructions that go with your project detail sheet that tell you the kinds of information that capital planning needs to have in it. And so that would include some of the cost type of stuff. And so whoever the proponent was would need to either know that if they were the DPW person, or have a way to figure it out by getting the proper assistance to do that. I think if that's defined.
I think it's a line of demarcation. I think capital planning is in the lead up until an article is approved at town meeting, and then once it turns into operations, then it's operations responsibility to be reporting back to whomever it's appropriate to report back to.
Yeah, I would do that.
I did get feedback from somebody on the capital planning committee who made a point that I thought was worth considering, which is if capital planning has at least some insight into the operational sort of what happens after approval at town meeting, that can kind of inform the way they approach the next year of requests. And there might be learning that happens if you see that, oh, we thought this was going to cost X amount of dollars and take X amount of months, but actually we learned that it didn't. Then maybe they're able to like factor that in when they get a similar request in the future. So maybe the issue is more just figuring out how that second half of the process information gets back to capital planning in a way that's meaningful.
Maybe the department heads, you know, during that process, kind of keep tally of what happens, and at the end give a summary, or you know, even halfway through, kind of, okay, to your point, that we thought it was gonna take 6 months, it took 3, but really kind of document the process as they go, and then they can give that to capital planning in a brief little summary,
Right.
and that might help.
I
And
think
then the
the,
department heads are reporting out to, well, I would be on top of it anyway, but they'd
Right.
be reporting out to the board of selectmen, they'd be reporting out to advisory, and capital planning is on distribution, just as everybody else is. So what we always want to avoid is, we're reporting data anyway, so we want to report it once, we don't want to report it and then have any committee, doesn't matter who they are, also reaching out to the department heads.
Yeah.
We want to try to streamline that.
And I also think keeping the department heads on it is good too. This is why we wanted to include that it has to be spent out within a certain time, because sometimes things just are not, when I'm emailing people like, have you started the parking lot repairs, I need to spend this money, and,
Yeah.
so.
well, I think from that perspective, making sure that if we appropriate money, that it's spent.
Right.
Because we had that situation with the district where we had appropriated money and, 2 years have gone by and they still haven't done the work. But we need to be careful that we don't turn this into a micromanagement thing. Because the perfect example is the culverts. We had, the culverts were delayed a year, and no disrespect to anybody, but we had a lot of people who had no clue about what they were talking about, determining that the cost should be this, the cost should be that, and we don't need to do this and that, all these Monday morning quarterbacks.
Well, and also if you're borrowing, it has to be done.
Yeah.
I understand, but the thing is, but in the case of one of the culverts, Berlin Road, I mean, we budgeted, a significant amount of money for that, and people were questioning why. But as it turned out, there were some unforeseen circumstances that no one knew about in terms of peat and this and that and the other thing, where it was actually very good that we budgeted the amount of money that we did, and, Harold was being conservative about that, so that we could continue and finish that project and not necessarily have to go back to the well or find, do an advisory transfer. So I want to make sure we don't necessarily do all this micromanagement and just because a project came in under or over, that's the benchmark to use regardless for the next one. Because, capital planning may not necessarily have the knowledge of culverts and this and that and the other thing. Other thing I just want to point out is Linda sent me a draft which is dated 8/7/17, which is 18 pages. What we have here tonight is 9/12, and it's only 6 pages.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know if we're going to be able to sort of go through and edit this one.
So the draft that's 9/12 was just this is what we should be dealing with tonight because it's just the capital planning
Okay,
policy.
cool, okay, that makes sense then.
And sorry, nobody got it, they're all on the bench.
Let me add to this discussion on the oversight, because it also depends on the project. What you don't want is for, right now, it's worded, that capital planning will develop a system for monitoring and reporting. Well, as an example, you don't want to do that with the library, because in the library, because of the size of the project, we were required by the procurement laws to hire a program manager. And that person paid by the town was doing all sorts of stuff. Yes, they need the information eventually, but they don't need to manage that project. Same with a school, same with a public safety building. So the big things are going to have their own internal systems. It's just the data that you need to have and the lessons learned that need to be fed into capital planning. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah.
So Don, were you okay with this section, absent capital planning, driving it for the most part?
I didn't see anything that.
So maybe we come up with ideas on who would drive it, and to Ken's point, we add in language, absent any major projects required by law or whatever they're gonna hold us to.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I'm responsible for
Oh,
driving it. I mean, I need to, make sure each individual department head is reporting in the information that's required in a timely manner. And I'm the one that should be responsible for doing that.
On bigger projects like Ken had mentioned, there might be an external group, but maybe they don't have to report to capital planning. But the problem I had with both projects is trying to get someone to tell me the spend down, and each had a building committee, and they weren't reporting to the treasurer, who needs to know the spend down. So that's an important point to keep involved in. Also, every May, after town meeting, Harold, or whoever the DPW director is, has to sit down right away with the treasurer and go through the projects so that we know what is gonna be spent in 6 months or a year. Because right away, we have to go to a financial advisor because we issue a ban in early June every year. So it's really important, Harold would say, yes, I'm gonna do this and spend it all in, 3 months or 6 months. And that first year, after all the projects were approved, he had expected to spend all that money by like January, in the 6 months after. So I think that's really important that, that be part of the process.
You just add a
Chris?
bullet in that series of bullets there. That's what we've endeavored to do in that last section.
Chris Lineberg?
That's a very good point.
Brian, I don't know if you're referring to my comment, but that was really around micromanaging the project, but getting feedback as to what's spent, when it closes, and when it was forecasted to do all those things. And then kind of feed that into sort of a report card for how well we're doing at forecasting. The example I gave was if next year we spend 30% of what we projected to spend, or 130%, or whatever, that we have that metric, and we do the same for maybe year 2 or year 3. So we have this rolling tool, if you will, a metric, if you will, at how we're doing, rather than just doing the same thing every year and only end up, we're not really forecasting accurately at all. So it wasn't for managing or micromanaging the departments and, that sort of effort, but it was just really to develop a tool that we can rate ourselves on forecasting.
Yeah, that was my understanding of kind of what you were proposing, and I guess there's a fine line between micromanaging and learning, but I feel like that's why we need to have this conversation, because we want to trust the experts at the end of the day and not micromanage.
No, I don't see it as micromanaging. We're just a receptacle for data. Just give us the data. We're not going to say you should have spent this sooner, or you shouldn't have spent this much. It's just, okay, last year we hit it. We nailed it. 99%. Perfect. Year 2, 10%. What happened? Maybe we need to spend more time the following year, outlying years, on how departments develop that. Maybe it's, I don't know, really concentrating on this year. What I'm throwing in those other buckets, I have no idea. I mean, that's just an example, a ridiculous example. I'm sure they're not doing that. But, I'm not, again, I just want to get away from this managing department thing. That's not what I'm proposing. Just give us the data. We'll try to develop a tool that's meaningful, that shows how well we're doing forecasting.
Yeah, and to Brian's point, where he mentioned that we were all in this room a year ago. I mean, that was the one area that the town of Northborough, John vaguely mentioned to us, but it was that forecasting. Right, what we're doing here is just laying out the foundation and putting in a working document. And again, we have a lot of these pieces, but it's more repackaging and bring to the forefront. And once we can nail this down, then, and it's my understanding that's what he did, he nailed down his process and then could then have that ability to start forecasting.
Right.
So Chris, you're dead on. I mean, that's what we want to work on, getting to, absolutely, and trying to anticipate, those areas.
And I think doing a review at the end is really important. I mean, there's certainly learnings to be done. It could be on a given project, by the time we went out to bid, from the time we did the forecast, materials of a certain type escalated 25%. So it was unavoidable. It could be that, we made some assumptions we shouldn't have, and we blew the number, and it could have been a better number. So I think, however we have variances, or wherever we have variances, it's important to find out why.
I have a question about the dollar figure. 10,000 I think is too low. But I don't know what anybody else thought.
And then Oscar, we're already on that.
Page 4.
Page 4.
A. Definition of dollar.
I think we currently use 25.
That's what I was
We do.
thinking.
Well, we can
Yeah.
make it 25.
We're all in agreement? Make it 25?
Sure.
All right.
what ends up happening though is like the school usually comes in with a lot of
Right,
items
True.
under
because
that.
they have that threshold.
They're the ones that typically, if we want to review a lot of the stuff they're doing, it's 10,000 for lockers, 10,000 for carpets, and no one item triggers the $25,000 threshold. So I don't have a problem with leaving 10,000 as the number. I mean, we don't end up with that many capital requests every year, even using 10,000 as a threshold, so I don't have an issue with it.
No, I do, because again, it's the operational stuff, a dump truck, a backhoe, something that, you know, is being used for the day-to-day operation of the town. I think that needs to be looked at a little bit differently than putting a roof on Florence
Well,
Soil.
I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just rated
it
matters.
yeah, we look at those the same. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think-
No, but I don't think capital planning should decide that Harold doesn't need a dump truck. I mean, I think, you know, they,
I disagree.
Maybe this
No.
year as opposed to next year?
no, that's
That's
because
kind of
capital
what-
planning only meets a few times a year, and I think, you know, looking at what's the best use of money, say, to roof Florence Sawyer versus, you know, you have a committee now saying, well, gee, Harold, you really don't need a dump truck.
Well, I think a lot of his timing is what capital planning is gonna help us with. Because he may need a dump truck, but it may not be feasible. It
It's-
just may not be fiscally
It-
responsible.
this-
Because advisory talks about that.
Isn't the value knowing what we're gonna be spending for each of the next 5 or 6 years?
Oh, no, I think knowing all that's fine, but I think you can't use the same criteria for a 1 in 10 year project versus something that, you know, you're
No,
gonna buy
I think
a
we
truck.
can trust their understanding of, you know, those kind of things.
So yeah, I mean, we're more there for prioritization. Like, we don't, if he says he needs a dump truck, we don't say, no, you can't have
I
that.
mean, they know what's a need and what's frivolous and what
Well,
should be
and at the same
discussed.
time, we say, you know, if it's a heavy capital year, could this get pushed to next year?
Yeah,
And
because what
they'll say
happens
yes or
if
no.
it's a new fire truck or a new ambulance? Do we have the same criteria you're talking about for that department as well?
Well, the ambulance
Because
shouldn't,
ambulance-
ambulance shouldn't even be on the list because.
I'm just saying,
Oh,
as a
but no, but
reference.
fire truck, absolutely, because that's not a, you know, small purchase. I mean, that's an extraordinary
But
purchase.
if they said, well, we need it this year or by next year, so are we looking at the same way as you're looking at the DPW sander?
No, I would not look at a fire truck the same way I'm looking at a DPW
So
stand, not at all.
maybe DPW is in their own,
I think it's the
kind
same
of-
criteria though.
I'm not saying that we don't rank and look at criteria, but I think we need to have we can't just lump everything in one bucket and say,
But I think that's what the weighting and things are for.
Exactly.
That it- So
Exactly.
you'll
Alright.
weight it
Yes.
higher if it's something that's operational vehicle or something like that. That's where you.
but I think this is
distinction.
important to know what's gonna happen over the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years, of when these things are gonna hit. I absolutely agree with that.
I mean, Mike, is it not, I mean, your biggest struggle is getting out legitimate 5
Yeah.
years.
Yeah,
I mean, you can get it for some departments, you definitely don't get it for all. And, you know, the further you go out, granted, the number is gonna be less relevant, but it's just, you know, pie in the sky
yeah.
in some cases.
And I mean, Harold was
That's
very
the hard
good
part.
about a pretty accurate 3-year forecast. Once you get to 4, 5, 6, I mean, it's
Yeah.
anyone's guess. But, you know, the next 3 years out, it was pretty accurate, and stuff gets shifted around every year, and that's
Sure.
good. That's good to know too. But no, it's helpful, that's what we need to plan for, and things like the trucks that they buy. I mean, it's tough even to find a list of the fleet, like what we have, what's the age of it, what do we expect, you know, to be replaced every few years? Is the number of trucks we have the right number of trucks? I mean, those are the sorts of questions that the committee asks.
So actually, just on that point for a second,
Yeah, I think capital planning should have that.
where'd it go?
Capital planning should have all of that.
So this is from the Division of Local Services. And what they do is they created basically like a template that capital planning committees can use to develop an inventory. So I was thinking, like, this isn't formally on the agenda, but this is a tool that you guys could maybe use it doesn't have to be, I mean, this is crazy detailed, but it seems to me that the inventory is like kind of starting point. And then like in a perfect world, going back to the project detail sheet, in a perfect world, every capital item would show up somewhere on a capital improvement plan before it came into an actual budget. So, because you'd see it coming, like advancing year by year by year.
Yeah.
So like you'd see it in 2021 and then advancing as you get closer and closer. The value, I think, of having a combination of like the sheet where all the project detail is plus an evaluation system is that, I'm gonna open this too, just so we can play around, because I feel like some of the discussions we were just having now, it won't be as controversial when you actually go to do it. So like, for example, a dump truck. Effect on public health and safety. I mean, I'd say it either vastly improves, in my view, or maybe improves moderately, but you just choose that. Is it mandated? I don't really know. Does it support our master plan long-term strategy? Yeah, because you need good roads. Effect on operating costs, I wouldn't know, but like departmental priority, I'm guessing in a given year it might be high, right? So these things all translate into like a very high point for that project in a given year. And I feel like once we actually start, we don't have to ultimately use this, but if we play around with it this year, maybe we'll say, oh, this is terrible, or maybe we'll say we need to tweak the way these points actually add up, or maybe we say this is a waste of our time. But I think it's worth just seeing how it works out.
That's true. I mean, what we do is less scientific than this. I mean, we as a committee talk with them and get us, all the department heads, and get a sense of what their priorities are and what's most important to them. If something had to get bumped to next year,
Yep.
what is it? Right.
So,
With the vehicle, I mean, DPW is the heaviest user of capital in the town, by far. With police, when we moved to doing cruisers in the budget, at the time, Chief Alfano would show us sheets of like, here's the fleet, here's the years, here's the mileage, and it was just really easy to see how every year something's going to age out of that, and that's, you set your replacement schedule based on that. And so for DPW trucks, we've been pretty consistent, probably every other year or so, getting a new truck. So if we can figure out what the right cadence for those things is, I think that makes it a lot easier too. You replace things on a known timeline, and it lets everyone budget a lot easier for the future years. I mean, that's ultimately, like, that's what we want to get to, is just, knowing what's coming down the road.
So on the project detail sheet, could we have like an estimated lifespan? What's the interval of replacement, something like that?
Cost of replacement. 5 years out would be different than that.
Not as the cost, but just the expected life.
Yeah, I mean, we have that on the current sheets that we use.
It's hard to do it.
Yeah, and we need that for borrowing anyways, so.
you said you do have that on the
That's on the
current
current
sheets,
sheet,
so
yeah.
it's a separate one from that.
Yeah. Those are the sheets that the department heads turn in to Don at the
Got it.
beginning of the budget.
That's captured already. I mean, tightening up the process a little bit, with whatever forms we end up using, will be very helpful, because you still have the risk of human error, misinterpretation, or whatever. For example, in the police capital proposal last year on the radios and the repeaters, that was always Chief Nelson's #1 priority. Yet, somewhere along the process, there was some misinterpretation that it wasn't as high a priority and it could wait another year when it absolutely couldn't. So anything we can do to help with things like that, is very beneficial.
But that was a perfect example of an expense that came in that was not on the radar. Like, that had never come before capital planning. It was never on any 5-year forecast before last year. And this is a must-have for this year. So, that's what we can't have, right? I mean, unless it's like a break situation. This the equipment broke, you know, this
No,
But
culvert
that's kind of what
collapsed.
Stan's talking about, the dump truck. That was a good example of a department head saying, I need this, it's necessary, it's for safety, yada, yada, yada.
Oh,
Whereas the same thing as
the pickup truck from, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, the cell tower was definitely, let's hope we don't have many more of those. And it's an exceptionally good story, you know, the outcome of that. But, I mean, that caught us all off guard. And Mike, to your point, you're right. I mean, the whole entire idea of a capital planning timeline is so we don't get caught off guard.
Well, but the root cause of that was we had a transition in chiefs, and Chief Nelson brought it forward as a need that had not been brought forward beforehand.
Yeah.
So, not to get it, I'm not interested in the why, but I just to say, you know, the process, it's not that the process would have worked if it had been followed, and with the new chief, it was. It just, he really emphasized the need for that.
Yeah.
Well, in the presentation last year, it was about charting. You know, he showed charts when debt was falling off and when you could take on, you know, large expenses like that. So we wanted department heads thinking 3 and 5 years ahead instead of saying, you know, I need it now, you know, looking ahead at what they're gonna need.
And can we get the school on board with this too?
Yeah, in fact, you need to get all you really need to get all the departments on board. As an example, you would want to make sure that the cemetery people are telling you if they have their eyes on some piece of land somewhere that's needed or desired for a cemetery. Because that's something that, and it's different from a truck, but you got to know about that. I mean, right? The sentence says it will contain a list of capital improvement projects proposed for the town within the next 6 years. Well, you gotta gather that data, and that data isn't just gathered from DPW and the police. It's got to be gathered from everybody. So we have to make sure there's a way that everybody knows to get their information into capital planning at the time they're supposed to, and to fill out the forms.
I think that should be the budget message this year. Very strong, just capital budget message. Like not within the, like a separate, something that goes out just about capital planning this year.
You know, the policy, without being heavy-handed, it tries to, in section D on the calendar, it basically tries to create a consequence for projects that haven't gone through the process in the way that we're kind of thinking of it, because basically it says, you know, if the proponent of a capital project hasn't had their project go through the evaluation process the capital planning committee sets up, they're gonna have to basically explain why and have a good reason, and then, you know, like figure out whether capital planning wants to even consider it. Because I think we don't, there are emergency circumstances that come up, but those should be really rare.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I mean, that right there for everyone in the crowd and everyone at home, I mean, that is a function of, as we're coming down the home stretch, trying to button everything up and get ready for town meeting, you know, coming in with a last minute request puts us all under the gun on many fronts, all the way down to, you know, is it gonna land in time in the warrant to get printed? So, I mean, that is a critical component. Without, you know, taking away from this, is this a good jumping off point to go to the proposed calendar?
Yeah. Does everybody have a copy of the draft calendar? It
One
looks
pager.
like that.
Is that in the old?
It's in the packet that Linda. Yeah. So just a couple of quick notes about this calendar before we all talk about it. When we were kind of drafting this initially, we were using, Division of Local Services has like a sample of what their capital planning timeline would look like in the abstract. So I was kind of trying to use that as a jumping off point. But the other thing is that because this is the first year that we would be trying to define kind of like the arc of our capital planning year, there's probably going to be, definitely in this version, there's some overlap in terms of who's present at meetings. My thought was that in the interests of like having advisory committee and capital planning get on the same page about a lot of things, it might be helpful to have some overlap this year, but I'm open to changing that if people think it's a waste of time or if it would be inefficient. But that's kind of why there is some doubling up in this calendar.
Well, you and I discussed that before the meeting, and if we're, and I don't have strong opinions about this, but if we're going to use this as the year that we kind of road test this and see if the process that we put together is the one we want to use going forward, then I don't know why you would double up in FY19 when your intention wouldn't be to double up in FY20 and FY21, et cetera. I would think we would want to stress test the vision we have for going forward as to how this is work and not do something different for the 1 year. So those would be my thoughts. And also for October, it just struck me as I'm looking at this, town administrator distribute score sheets, et cetera. I will plan on having a staff meeting at the appropriate time in October where I've got all the department heads in and we can walk through things in advance before they all get sent out to try to avoid any questions or confusions right up front. So I'll have them all in the same room, and between myself and Kristen and Nanachka, gotta get used to not saying Donna,
Yes.
that hopefully we can get the staff off on the right foot with the new process.
Did other people have ideas about ways to tweak the calendar, or if there's things that are unrealistic, or oh, on the topic of the school, so in this draft of the calendar, I have in December, like, advisory committee or the liaisons from advisory would try to set up a meeting with the facility person and maybe the finance team in the district, because that seemed like last year some of those requests were coming, right? They came a little later in the process.
A lot of them came from Harold. He took over submitting their capital requests.
So what do you think would make sense in terms of?
I mean, well, with the school, in the past, the committee's done a walkthrough with the school kind of in the December, January timeframe to look at the stuff they're asking for, and it was a good just kind of touch base with, here's what we have, here's what's coming down. Before the past couple of years, they actually were giving us a pretty detailed 5-year report. It didn't get followed, but they were giving us the information, and it was pretty, it was done well.
Yeah, there was a new, as we know, there was a new facilities director last year, and Harold really, you're absolutely right, Harold did jump in and try to help them out when things didn't seem to be moving forward.
Don, this calendar, and it looks as though it's been revised when we met early in the summer. I feel as though we were trying to move things up closer towards September, potentially. The concern that I had on this, Don, was we were meeting earlier. You weren't at the meeting, but there was some critical components tied to you, and I want to make sure that you were on board with some of these things. So,
well, I'm on board with this, looking at it. I mean, because this really isn't, the timing isn't far off from where we've been anyway. I'm not so sure that things in October, November, if they were pulled into September and August, I'm not so sure I would agree with that. But I don't see anything, timing-wise, I don't see anything that I have an issue with there.
I mean, this feels like the same time that we had last year. And what ended up happening is we get the capital request December 31st.
Yeah, and so that's critical. That
we need to get the stuff into capital planning more quickly than we have in the past.
Yeah.
Which gives capital planning more time to react.
And what's still listed on here, you're right, is the typical advisory schedule. folks on advisory, we've talked about this before. My goal was to have a draft for tonight to hand out, but I will send that out by the end of the week. But I've worked, to the point up here where we're going to focus first on the high spend departments. That is the game plan. I spent some time working on a draft, completely throwing out our previous calendars, and we initially threw around the idea, I hope you guys are still potentially on board, of meeting Tuesdays and Thursdays, at least early on. And I've determined we can hammer out the budget in 6 meetings, that's 3 weeks. We are done January 18th, so that gives us plenty of time in the event of a snow day, whatever it is, because we were all struggling coming down the home stretch last year. So the game plan is we want to try and front load this thing, get it out of the way, so we can spend more time on capital. And Brian, whether that's, makes it easier for capital planning because they only have to hang out with us for 6 nights as opposed to, a month and a half. I mean, either way, twice a week, it's going to suck for 3 weeks, but it's over and done with. So that's the idea.
Do we have an idea, what is capital planning, if you had your wish, when would you want your capital planning in, what date?
Items in by Thanksgiving, let us review things early December, maybe start meeting in December.
Yeah.
Because I can get the budget message out first week in November. And the capital stuff will be out before that, it'll go out in October. So there's no reason why we couldn't put a schedule together that could accommodate that.
And the other thing that's important that we talked about is making sure that all the requests get documented in some kind of pro forma budget or whatever at the beginning so that we know what they are instead of waiting until after we've had all the discussions to know. Or at least I think that would help advisors. It would help me certainly. To know what the bottom line is from the very beginning.
Right, so the town administrator just distributes the score sheet template to department heads for capital planning purposes. Even if that was the second week in October, there's no reason in the world why we can't have it back to capital planning for Thanksgiving last week in November at the latest.
Yeah,
Sets them up for December.
Yeah, no, but clearly a great idea, Don, to preview that in September, so you're able to explain what the idea is, what your expectations are, as opposed to just handing it out.
Well, no, I'll preview it in early October.
Yeah.
And we're halfway through September now, so make sure that everything's finalized. I'll preview it with all the department heads in early October, a week or so before it's sent out. So you're correct, that's what I want. I want to avoid surprise, I want to avoid as many questions. I mean, some questions are going to be inevitable. Somebody didn't understand something, but I think we can get way out ahead of it by doing it that way.
Would you have all the budgets due like the Monday before Thanksgiving, the Monday of Thanksgiving week?
Well, if the budgets go out first week of November, I'm
Yeah.
not sure that I could. I mean, I could look at it.
Well, capital planning.
Or capital planning, yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
for capital planning.
So,
So what do we
I just
do?
want to make sure that I didn't use ambiguous language. So when I had the score sheet being distributed, what I had in mind was not, because I think you guys already use a form for like the project detail sheet. That's something you guys already use. So this, just to be clear, is the thing that we might end up using as that Excel that we were
Yeah,
playing around with?
whichever document or documents is agreed upon, that's
Okay.
what will go out.
I think we need to decide which project detail sheet we use, because I've seen 3 tonight. One that we used last year, one from Northborough, one from somewhere else. I think to Jonathan's point, I think it's important that whatever detail sheet it is includes projected life. That way we can look at the outlying years and see if maybe something fell out that shouldn't have fallen out. Maybe we need where's that cruiser that's gonna die in 5 years, out in year 5 kind of thing. Help to have that on whatever sheet we're gonna send out.
Now, project life is an absolute requirement, and since we do capture it already, we'll make sure that we should make sure whatever form we end up using, it includes that.
I would also suggest that people be asked to make sure to go the 5 or 6 years out. And that even if they don't have capital in the first year or two, that they really think out ahead so that they get some indication of that in there. And we should make sure to hit the committees that don't necessarily have staff and things of that sort, but who might have longer term sort of capital needs that they would have.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from an advisory standpoint, I think we need to be part of that. I think we need to remind the department heads of that when they are in front of us. I've had a conversation with Mike several times over the years, even when I was on capital planning. That is the hard part, on getting that accurate data. And even if there's nothing on the immediate horizon, getting, you know, a non-financial, no disrespect to the department heads, but they don't all have a financial background, right? I mean, getting them to think from a financial standpoint, you know, on a longer term basis, that is a struggle. So whatever message, I think we can take on some of that and just remind them, even if, to your point, Ken, if they've never had a capital item project, when they're in front of us going over their budget, you can reference it.
Yes, I mean, even if they don't have a dollar value, like in mind, just knowing a project, I mean, even that is helpful. That, you know, maybe you or we can help them put money towards that.
Denoshka.
Could we have the budgets due December 1st?
We could, it's just a matter of, you know, when we agree to get the message out.
Because last year it was just, I think it was around the 8th, and nobody ever turns them in on time, and they're all wrong. And then, so I lose weeks getting them back to people to correct. So I think if we give them a December 1st deadline, that gives me another 2 weeks to go back and forth with people. I mean, I don't know why I can't do that personally.
Yeah, I don't see where that would be a problem either. I wouldn't say they were all wrong. I don't think that's fair to the department heads. There were some that needed more work than others, but yeah, they weren't all wrong.
So Dawn, would it be finalizing whatever project detail sheet, would that be something you and capital planning will do, or do you want us to be involved?
To be honest, I mean, I'd like to be involved, but I think it's more important what capital planning is comfortable with and what advisory is comfortable with, and then I'll support whatever it is that the two boards feel they need.
I think also that the detail sheet shows up in the warrant, right? The published warrant, town meeting, and then it goes up as a slide.
It hasn't.
It hasn't.
I thought that's what was proposed last year, that it's like this very transparent document that goes into
Yeah.
the warrant.
Jonathan,
the Northborough
yeah.
identified
Oh,
that.
you mean like in
True.
theory?
Yeah, because this is, it's not just for us, it's for the public to
Right.
see what the model is, all that information, and have a picture, and it
Yeah.
just puts them in.
That you're right. That was discussed, and that is, we were working towards that, absolutely, and I think we still are.
It wasn't done last year, but it didn't fall off the plan to get to it somehow.
So the one with the photograph and the clear graphics, you know, of the three that that one looks best
Yep.
in terms of being for everybody.
So that sounds like something we need to iron out, what that's gonna look like, and,
In the next 3 weeks or so.
yeah. So Don, you would propose that advisory and capital planning iron that out and then kind of send to you?
Mhm.
Okay.
And I'll be happy to be involved, but I think it's less important what I think needs to go in there versus the people that are going to be using it directly feel they need it. Because whatever you guys think you need, I think is going to be reasonable. So I don't want to slow the process down. I mean, but I will be involved. But I'm more interested in what you guys think you need.
You could start with the one Jonathan mentioned that has a picture on it. Have you and Mike or you and somebody from capital planning sit down, add stuff from the other ones, and then circulate it around everybody else.
Yeah. The ones with the pictures do
That
look
would be
nice.
a-
No, it does look nice, but I felt as though there was some potential problem Nanotchka's on. Can you help me out with this?
Well-
Were certain department heads not, they were
No,
maybe
Harold-
technology challenged?
Well, yeah, Harold loved the form. He was very nervous on the pictures.
Okay.
And I said that someone could certainly help them drop in the photos.
All right.
Because they were just given the form, last year. They had no problem with the form, and then they just wanted to know, how they were supposed to get the pictures and drop them in. But,
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who can help them.
If you don't have a picture, it doesn't
Yeah.
get thrown out.
Yeah, I mean, but they had no problem with the form.
Yeah, I guess, do we have any concerns about, maybe an issue that might arise where a certain department head has an idea of the model or vehicle in question, and maybe the picture doesn't necessarily line up with the model, and then any ramifications on that front because we're posting it in an official document,
Maybe you
And
put
then-
something like example of, or like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like this. and-
Visual approximation.
Visual approximation, just as well.
all right.
Stock photo.
So then,
So,
okay.
so a couple things, so, in the past, DPW has submitted requests on behalf of a lot of people, like repairs to the library, repairs to Houghton, things
Yeah.
like that, fall into DPW. Is that the model we wanted to maintain going forward? Because I think in that case, then there's a lot of other department heads that maybe aren't submitting stuff because they just talk to Harold and they say this or that.
Yeah, and I think we generally have an idea where you're right, a lot of things do flow through Harold or in the past because of his knowledge and the, purview of what he's got.
Whoever the DPW director is, they would have the most expertise in that area. So
Yeah.
rather than, I wouldn't expect Kelly to spec out what she needs for a certain repair for the building. She would raise the concern, then it's up to the DPW director to spec that out.
Right, because the repair budget's coming out of the DPW, it's out of his building account, not the library's budget.
But Mike, to your-
And that's why it's
Yeah.
been done that way.
But to your point, that's the other thing that I'm proposing is, is when we can get all of this, updated and in front of us, that means, the meeting that we have with the given department head, it's gonna be about their budget and their capital item. So, you're right, Harold may have submitted something relative to the library. It doesn't mean that you or advisor or anyone, we absolutely could want to find out from the folks who are living and breathing inside that building what the deal is, what the issue is, why, so.
We also need good numbers, like, not just pie in the sky. Like, there has to be some rationale for what the
Yeah.
department head's numbers are. Because if I'm gonna throw it into the budget, I think to Ken's point, like, you wanna see the whole scope of the budget right away. If the numbers are constantly changing as we get towards the end, then that doesn't do anybody any good either. So I
Yeah.
think people need to be confident in their estimates.
Yeah, I think there was one issue last year, and we all know why that was the case, and my hope is that will not be the case this year.
And I think what we'll learn this year by somewhat accelerating the capital planning process, we're not accelerating it significantly, or drastically, but how long it takes for people to get good numbers
Right.
for their projects. We may find that, again, all projects are different, but it may take longer, for example, or it will take longer, for example, to get a good estimate as far as, let's say, replacing the columns over Florence Sawyer, or Emerson, sorry, as opposed to, we need a new dump truck.
Yeah.
Obviously we get the dump truck numbers in a matter of days, we're not gonna get the numbers for a building project that quickly.
And the other thing to build on that is that if the columns, as an example, were 4 years from now, it would be less important to have a good number in that than if they were this year. And you
I
could
meant more
expect them
for,
to
right,
evolve
FY19.
over the
Right.
4 years, that they would learn more, they would do some of the engineering or whatever it was, so that by the time it actually hit the budget, year, then you'd really need to know those numbers.
Yeah, but to that point, maybe I expect too much, but if, we'll stick with the column example, if it's 4 years out, put a number out there.
I agree.
Right?
But that number could.
2 years out, start doing some homework,
Right.
right? So the year that it's coming, it's not when we ask for a number and we want a legit number, it's not, oh, well, I'm gonna have to, you should have been doing this for the past,
Shouldn't
2,
this
3 years.
policy then have the notion that a prompt year has to be a financial quality budget or number, and then year 2, 3, 4, 5 can be budget quality numbers? I mean, it wouldn't hurt to put that in here, I think, because if other departments are looking at this, it's, the quality of the number is important. And I think the quality of the number is also enhanced by starting the budget letter early, so that people say, hey, I've got this problem, I can look at alternatives, I can select the best alternative, I can go out and get a number, get a quote or whatever.
So that's, I mean,
Give them all the time in the world, because these people have vacations and other interrupting things. And then by December 1 or whatever your date was, we've got a good work product.
I mean, there's specific rules, right? We can't get I don't know if we get a quote or what it's called for a lot of these projects. Like, I mean, and
We can get a quote for anything, but we
It
can't,
depends.
but we can't go out to bid
Yeah.
unless we have money appropriated.
okay.
But we can get quotes, we can get estimates, we can't get
Yeah,
necessarily quotes.
And how accurate is that
Financial
compared to the bid?
quality,
Right.
plus or minus, what is it?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to have written estimates for everything? That's something that we've never had in the past. Projects and vehicles have never had a written estimate to come with us. It's just whatever's on the department sheet. And I'm sure that's not true. Some people have given us estimates.
Mhm.
But these are great ideas, and the sooner we start the process and engage people that what's expected of them, I think the better the work product will be on December 1 and on January. I mean, as far as advisory goes, if we get this in January, early January, that'd be great.
Can I ask a question
Good
about,
difference.
I remember, I'm not sure if it was the fire department, but we had 3 options. And we were asked which,
Speaking of fire,
sounds like the movie Birds. They gave us 3 options to choose from. Do you remember, as far as whatever equipment it was? I don't know if it was the
Oh, yeah.
Jaws of Life, or, I don't remember, patch this is a temporary thing for so many years, and this is the golden eagle, whatever it was.
Mhm.
Is that something they can do with these forms too, is say, listen, we have 3 options, we want to show you these? How does that work? Or do we let them pick? Because we were asked to go in and decide and vote on what we thought would have been a better option financially. So how does that work if it comes to something like that? Do we have a separate form or a place where?
I would say we use the same form twice. I mean, for example, we could have a repair option, we could have a replace option. And the repair option would say, okay, it's gonna buy us 4 or 5 years. The replacement option is, this is gonna be good for 20 years. And then we make a value judgment as to whether or not we wanna spend X amount of dollars to repair something versus Y dollars to replace it.
As opposed to buy and lease. We've done that too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying we just treat it as 2 separate projects, for 2 separate sheets for the same thing.
For the sake of analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think on like the repair one, if we're talking about, a vehicle, for example,
Mhm.
there should be some other line items. Like I'm gonna want to know from the department head what additional, because we heard year after year from Chief Alfano, we kept this cruiser on 1 extra year, and it translated into
Yeah.
more time in the shop, right? So there is, Connie, to your point, right? There definitely can be 2 different options, and so we're going to need more of that data. So I like your idea, Don. 2 different sheets, but I don't necessarily know if they should be exact, right? That sheet for the repair item
Mhm.
might have some different line items
Good.
to factor.
Repair item wouldn't be capital, so be capital.
I still want to know.
Unless
Right.
it extends the life 5 or more
It
years.
could be capital, I mean, Harold had the sander body
That's right, that's
to
right.
borrow for, and then the sander, whatever,
Oh, yeah, right.
LC and all
Yeah.
that, so. So sometimes,
Yeah.
especially if you're talking about his equipment, both could be capital.
Yep.
Right. And we don't want to over-engineer the forms either,
No.
but I think to be able to break things down into a couple of different buckets like that, for
Yeah.
example. And I think a piece of DPW equipment, a backhoe, dump truck, whatever, you know, we could get 4 more years out of this if we spend this, and here's what it's gonna cost to buy a new one, or buy a used low mileage one.
Yeah, I think there should be like an alternative section on the one form. I don't think we should have multiple forms, because people don't want to
Yeah, you
fill
can
out
attach.
multiple. Yeah, I mean, just
Because if
just
you
have a
want to do
section
a
for alternatives.
net present cost or something, you know, discount everything.
I mean, these are all, I think, a jumping off point for capital planning and advisory. They're not set in stone, but that's it, right? And we can discuss alternatives.
Yeah.
We did with ambulance last year.
But one thing though that I wanted to point out is that in the policy, there's an attempt to kind of formalize the idea that alternatives will be explored whenever there's a capital improvement project, because I just think that comes up a lot, and I think it's just important to have it like, so everyone knows what the expectation is.
So when we capture the data, it's important that everyone agrees the data should be captured.
Yeah.
Then the forms will be designed and
Yeah.
let's do it.
So it sounds like we're gonna figure out a group of people who are interested in working on the description and justification form. And then this is sort of the evaluation form. We don't have to spend a ton of time on it. I just wanted to quickly describe the way it's put together, and then folks that are interested can sign up to tweak it. But basically, oh, go ahead.
Before we go on to that, there's one more point about what we were talking about before. I don't know where we ended up with it, but I think the point was made, it would be good to put in the process that as these people are looking at next year, maybe 6 years, that the expectation is as those numbers that they threw out there for year 6 get closer, that they look at the quality of that number.
Yeah.
Every year. Not just leave it out there at 200,000 and wait until, as Brad said, you look at, year 2 to bid it out or whatever. Because I think that ought to be in, my opinion is that ought to be in the process.
So could like a notice go out to projects that are coming up like in a year or 2 in June? Go out to department heads saying this is coming up?
Like a reminder?
Well, just that, so you're not doing all your estimating in the fall, you could start in the summer?
Well, actually, that'll be part of the message I deliver at the staff meeting. And department heads that are really on top of the game don't wait until the budget process starts to start gathering numbers anyway. So, and that message will be reinforced as well.
Well, I would assume that once we start getting the sheets together, that part of their process is they're gonna review what they put in last year and what they put in for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then it's mandated that, okay, you need to refine that number a little bit.
Right.
And each year you get closer, it's gotta be refined more, and then at some point, you go get an actual estimate.
Right, we're not going to just carry the same number forward,
Exactly.
because that's not real world.
Yeah, so basically the idea is that as the number gets closer to this first column, it's a really concrete, valid number. Yeah, I think that's great. Okay, so, oh wait, we were gonna look at this sheet. Okay, so what I did was I took, if you look at the policy on page 5, there's a list of criteria that would be used to evaluate capital projects. And I took those 10, and then there's actually a couple more that I stole from Hudson's template, because I thought, like, for example, breadth of benefit, I thought was a good one. Priority given by the proponent or department head, I thought was a really important one to add. So basically, there are just numerical values assigned to different options for each of these criteria. This can totally be changed and tweaked. But then what happens is when a reviewer is looking at all the information about a given project, you just go through and you check your choice, and it automatically comes up with a point total. These weightings can be argued about and discussed. The points, all that stuff is up for discussion. But the idea is to kind of try to bring a little bit more, I think it'll be easier to track this sort of a thing when we just have like a score that refers to a certain criteria. And one thing that I thought we should discuss is, I put this in here in terms of like, does the item, like, especially a big picture item, does it support a recognized long-term goal of the community? In my view, that should be a criterion, but I'm acknowledging that like a lot of our planning documents are starting to get a little older, so we might not actually be able to really use that as a meaningful criterion right now. I don't know if other folks think that this is like an interesting one to include or how we would use it, but.
Well, something that refers to either the master plan or the open space plan, for example. The longer in the tooth it gets, or the older the plan gets, maybe the less weight it gets.
Yep.
A more current plan would be weighed more heavily than an old plan, but.
I think it's worded well, and I like the idea of having it there. And if nothing else, it becomes an incentive to update whatever. If it is getting long in the tooth, then it's time to update.
Who does the rankings?
So I think there's different ways of doing that. Like we could have a team, like 2 capital planning, 2 advisory, and 1 or 2 other people. I think that's for discussion. I know that.
What do other towns do?
So, you guys can pass this out. Basically, this is a sample bylaw that Division of Local Services drafted. Where basically we actually don't have an official bylaw on capital planning, but the sample bylaw basically says that there's a committee known as the Capital Improvement Committee, which is a member of the Board of Selectmen, a member of the Finance Committee, a member of the Planning Board. In this case, it's not a regional school district, so they have a school person and then 3 residents of the town. That's just an example, but like we could do a member of the Board of Selectmen, 2 members of the Capital Planning Committee, 2 members of the Advisory Committee, and then maybe an employee. I don't know. What do you think?
In theory, I like the concept of this. Was this from Northborough?
This was adapted from Hudson.
Okay, so Hudson and Northborough are both significantly bigger than us, and I imagine that they do have a lot of competing capital projects, like each year. I don't know that that's necessarily the case with us, right? We're not necessarily saying, oh, we're gonna redo this intersection or we're gonna redo that intersection. Because, in my years in capital planning, we haven't had those sorts of things. Like, the things that we're fixing generally need to be fixed or replaced.
Yep.
So I think this is good when you really have a lot of stuff and you need to draw a line somewhere. I think it's helpful. I don't know if this is going to be as helpful for us. Just truthfully.
Yep.
Question on it, as to the ratings, only on what's this particular year? Or are you looking out 5 years and saying, no, that's low priority or what? Any thoughts on that?
So I think before anything actually got included in the budget for a given year, it should go through this scoring process. But another way of using the scoring process instead of distinguishing just between competing projects is also as a threshold for whether something even gets on the plan at all. So I think we could use it both ways, potentially. Like if somebody says, oh, I'd like to buy this or do this in 2 years, and we analyze it and it actually just seems like it's not worth it in terms of the criteria, have the discussion sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I can see how you know, that type of scenario would play in Bolton, you know, relative to this scoring. I would agree with Mike that we're getting an increasing, it seems like we're getting an increasing level of capital project items, but, and I hope I don't shoot myself in the foot, I mean, we've been able to figure out a way to take care of, I mean, there's not many that we have to leave off. So I can see why a Hudson would need this, to literally draw a line in the sand, because they've got X amount and they've got 3 intersections they've got to fix, and how do we rank specifically 3 intersections, right? So
Now, I mean, maybe this becomes more of a priority for us as we're gonna start hitting those sorts of
yeah,
projects.
Well, let me give you another example. So let's say it's one of those, I think we're all sort of automatically thinking of the must-have type items, like things that we know we're eventually going to have to buy. But what if there were something where, I mean, like the town common is an example of something where that's a capital item, it's property, it's, some people might view it as a strategic thing to have, other people might view it as something that we didn't need to have, but this would be like a way of analyzing those things where we're making the call yes or no. I don't know. But again, we don't have to use it.
Is there, does Hudson, something just struck me, is there a minimum score that Hudson requires before something is seriously considered? Like if you scored out something, well, it doesn't matter what we score out, it came in at a 68, does it not get considered because 70 is the minimum, even though there may only be 3 capital projects?
I don't know. I mean, we could do something like that.
Then you might prioritize that.
We would need to decide that internally as
2
to
years out, 3 years out.
do that.
If it's lower on
I mean, part of this is like, again, you don't want to make work for people, but it seems to me that like for the volunteer boards that are kind of analyzing things, it helps us to be able to answer questions if the public ever has them about like, oh, well, why did that happen? It's like, actually, we thought about it. This is why it came out that way.
No, my concern is, and we haven't experienced this yet, but I'm hoping someday we might experience it, that our capital, we have a good year as far as not needing to do a lot of capital projects. So just because we have the money to do all the capital projects doesn't mean we should do all the capital projects, which would mean there should be a minimum score. That something isn't considered, even if we can afford it. If it doesn't meet a certain level, then we just shouldn't be doing it.
Yep.
So maybe capital planning just starts with a score, just maybe they start that this year, kind of see how it goes and stuff. I don't know.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
And then we've
Try
always,
it the first year.
Let
Yeah.
capital
That's what
planning
you
work
want.
this.
we've always categorized stuff into, you know,
Right.
need to have, nice to have,
Mhm.
sort of stuff and prioritize them.
You know more about it than we do.
And actually, this might be too much to bite off right now, but a variation of what you just talked about, Don, is, you know, to your point, you know, we don't necessarily have to do everything just because we have the money to do it. But I think we also should start taking a look at, we may choose not to do something this year because something that's next year or 2 years out, we know is of higher priority, and what we should be doing is banking some of that money for that project 2 or 3 years down the road, so that when we get to that point, we have a cushion. So we're not necessarily asking the public to foot the entire bill of that project that year, that we have now saved a little bit to cushion that blow. And I think, you know, we may want to say, well, you know, this is nice, it scored high, but you know, this other one's going to score higher, you know, and this is the lowest of the high, so, you know, that kind
But
of thing.
at least in a public way, we haven't really had that longer-term picture.
Right, and
They may have gotten some of the data, but it's not
Right.
complete data, and it hasn't really been made available to the
And I think
public
people will be more
to know and
responsive.
justify.
And I think so, because actually I've been getting some email from some of the citizens, you know, asking just that topic. You know, what are we doing to save for the stuff as opposed to figuring out where we're gonna get the money this year to spend for this project.
And Mike is absolutely right. I mean, capital planning is always broken down, top priority, second priority, nice to have type of thing. I mean, it's just doing it a different way up here.
Oh, right.
But that breakdown has always been done.
But I think it's okay that we don't go top priority to low priority and say, okay, we got this bucket of money, and when we get to this one, we've emptied the bucket. It's okay to stop higher and say, okay, let's put this money aside and not even spend it.
Because we've been in an environment where, someone mentioned it earlier, it has been more of, we need to get this, right? It absolutely would be great to get past that and be looking more towards those.
Well, and I mean,
so it sounds, if I may, it sounds like we are in consensus of moving towards this, and so now we just need to figure out who on a given committee would, figure this out and set up a rank. Is that what you're saying, Brian?
Well, I think tweaking this probably won't take too long, but I think we also kind of just need to decide, like, where it says evaluator, what is the universe of evaluators and how are they going to be chosen? Do we want to, like, one school of thought would be we just kind of randomly assign it. Another school of thought would be we actually kind of want to use evaluators with some subject matter expertise. I don't know. I mean, I sort of feel like we should just define the category and have the same people do it, but
Why wouldn't it be capital planning?
Yeah,
Why would it be
that's
the capital
capital
planning
planning.
or?
Why would you take away their responsibility?
That's a big part of what they do.
I would say capital planning.
At least this first year.
And if they wanted to kind of do a test drive
It's
today, they
to be
could look at
overwhelmed.
projects we've done in the past 5 years and see how they
It's
score.
also, there's a lot of subjective stuff there too.
Very
you know.
subjective. Well, once it's done,
yeah, I mean, I wasn't
Yeah,
suggesting that it was anyone other than them. I'm saying
Yeah.
it's an open question, so that sounds fine to me.
All right, done deal then.
Cool.
Good luck, Mike.
How do you feel about that?
He's like, why did I feel this?
Yeah, I mean, so to what you were just saying, in all the years I've done this, it's like every year, let's say we get a dozen, 15 capital requests. In any given year, maybe there's one that would fall under the nice to have. I mean, we just, like, our
Yeah.
capital items just aren't frivolous things that, and people may think that's what we're spending tax money on, but it's not. I mean, it's.
No, you're right,
equipment
and
it's-
Dawn and Sam bring up a great point. I mean, we, as long as I've been on advisory, we've taken your recommendations, we've taken care of the need-to-haves, and even if there's something at the bottom of the barrel, right, even if it's under the nice-to-have category, our position has been, well, if we can find a way within the budget to, then let's push it forward and let the collective town decide,
Mhm.
right? So I think Don and Stan bring up a great point. There is, maybe we set a minimum Mendoza line that if you fall below it, it's not happening.
I think that's one of the major purposes of the tool, I think.
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
You lose the nomenclature of nice to have, need to have, somewhat nice to have, and you get a number, objective number. If
Yeah.
that, and I think on this test drive, if we find that we're looking at all of this capital and we see what we used to call nice to have ending up at 50, for example, then, that's the threshold where we say, we're probably not gonna do this, even though it is nice to have.
All right.
Sounds good.
I love the pictures.
I put emojis in just for you.
Oh, God.
That was a
I was
sunset,
at
right?
town meetings at the very end.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Much better than the colon parentheses.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
All right. Take cookies before you leave.
Yeah, so for advisory folks, I will be getting the draft email over to Linda to get your feedback on the proposed calendar for this upcoming year. Basically, it's nailing it out in the first 3 weeks of January, Tuesday, Thursday nights, from a highest budget driver down.
Just so you remember that the selectmen won't be able to make those meetings because the meeting's on Thursday night.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. And that has been, I will say, over these past 2 years, the fact of selectmen participation in the meetings has been, I think, hugely helpful. And especially, the treasurer and accountant being involved as well.
Can you do a different night?
Yeah, I suppose we could. I mean, and that's the type of feedback I want to hear, right? So,
Well, send it out to me.
yeah.
And you want capital planning at those meetings, is that what you're asking for? Are we meeting with departments separately like we have in the past?
Yeah, but I think we can work that out. I think the idea, Brian, right, was for if capital planning was available, because we were
It
gonna,
would save the department.
yeah, we were,
Yeah, no,
that was the idea, right? We were gonna try and save the department head from coming in, 3 different nights.
Yeah.
Us, you, and the selectmen. I mean, the selectmen are gonna meet with them at some point, but if we can try and make their lives a little bit easier.
You're gonna have snow days in there.
Yeah, there sure will be a snow day in there
And
sometime.
that will be the process going forward, it's not just for FY19.
Yeah, that'd be the game.
When it was just gonna be for FY19, I didn't understand why we would do it that way if in FY20 we were gonna go back to the way we've been doing it. But if that's gonna be the process going forward, then that makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah.
I think that's the idea.
It will make for longer meetings, though.
No, exactly. I know, and
It can be. right?
but at the same time, Don, like
But maybe.
if we can suck it up and hammer it out in 3, like going into February and closing down the end of February. I mean, it is.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I just, and to use one of your phrases, no disrespect intended at all, but it's gonna make it all the more important that advisory manage to the time on
Yeah.
the agenda, so you don't have department heads coming in and waiting an hour and a half for their turn.
No, exactly.
And how
Exactly.
many meetings are you saying? 3 weeks of 2 meetings?
Yeah.
That's what he's saying.
I don't
Yep.
get that. I mean, how are we gonna cover?
Let's see what he says.
Yeah.
Yeah, how are you
He's
gonna
got
cover all
he's
that?
got new
That's like-
schemes, so.
Rather than 6
We
weeks.
usually
It may not work.
do
It may not work.
16 to 18 meetings.
Well, it's all right. I will get it out to you tomorrow. I'm gonna. This is suspenseful.
That's great.
I'm gonna
That's
hold.
great.
I'm gonna hold you all in suspense.
They came in twice, but we leave at 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Oh,
They're gonna be long. Yeah. All right. Everyone's ready to get out of here.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Well, Sheila comes to the